Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Bestseller Live. I'm your co host, Cynthia Johnson. Joined with me, my lovely co host, Rhett Power. Hi, Rhett. How are you?
I'm doing great. It is great to be with you and Amy today.
Absolutely. We have a fantastic author. Amy Morin is a licensed psychotherapist, international best-selling author, and one of the world's leading voices on mental strength. Her books have sold more than 1 million copies and have been translated into over 50 languages. Her TEDx talk, The Secret of Becoming Mentally Strong, has been viewed more than 25 million times and ranks among the most watched TEDx talks of all time. Her newest book, The Mental Strength Playbook: 50 Tools to Cope with Stress, Thrive Under Pressure, and Gain a Competitive Edge in the Workplace, was published in April 28th, on April 28th of this year, and offers practical strengths for building resilience and performing under pressure. Also, fun fact, Amy lives on a sailboat in the Florida Keys. Welcome, Amy. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me.
Well,
Uh,
I tell you, go ahead, Amy, go ahead.
I was
What were
gonna.
you gonna
I
say?
feel like I know what you're gonna say, so go ahead.
No, it's great to have you, and I love the choice of living arrangements. That is near and dear to my heart too. So we'll have to talk sailing after we get off a little bit.
Happy to do
But
so.
um, you know, what an amazing book, just to start with. But I want to go back a little bit. I mean, your work began with an article you wrote, right, as a reminder to yourself during an incredibly a difficult time. Looking back, why do you think it resonated with so many people?
I think it was one of the first articles about what not to do. And I think that really captured people's attention. It was called 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do.
Yeah.
And so I think that intrigued people to pick it up and say, all right, I want to click on this article and read it. But then I want to say when people read it that it resonated with them. So then they wanted to share it and say, look, like I experienced these things, or I'm struggling with these things, or maybe I've mastered these things. And it was really that seemed to help it catch on and spread like wildfire so that 50 million people did read it.
But why do you think it resonated?
I think we hadn't been talking much about mental strength. People didn't know what it was. People didn't understand that it was something you could build. It's not that you're either strong or you aren't. It's like physical strength. Yet we didn't have the instructions on how to build it. So I think that touched people. But also when I wrote it, came from a place of pain. I was a therapist and I'd lost my mother, I lost my husband, and I was about to lose my father-in-law. And I wrote it one of the lowest days of my life. And it was just meant to be a letter for myself, but I published it online. I thought, if it helps me, maybe it will help somebody else. But it was really the first piece of content I created that was really meant for myself, as opposed to writing for my audience or thinking I'm going to write this article in hopes that it would resonate. This one, that was not my intention at all. It was just something I needed. And apparently other people needed it too.
That's so interesting. And when you write from that place, I remember going to libraries and being most intrigued by the diaries from 100 years ago, and you're like, wow, this person really poured their heart out. And I know you didn't intend to make it resonate. You were really putting your own grief into the article. How do you think that that experience has shaped your writing moving forward with your books?
Yeah, as a therapist, I wrote pretty clinical before that. It was about research studies, and I would always cite my sources. And I was more concerned with making sure I could back up my facts, that anything I gave was going to be 100% something I could defend if somebody argued with it. This one was different. It was an opinion piece that says, here's what I've learned from my experience. While I do have research that backs those things up, the article didn't cite any of it, and nobody really called me out on that. So I think it's reminded me of that like anybody can take a bunch of studies and put them together and come up with a paper. But what really matters and makes our writing unique is more of like our stories, our life experience, our own voice. And those are the things that I think before this, I'd been tempted to edit out to try to make it more sterile so that I didn't overstep or I didn't offend anyone. But once this article went viral and I had an opportunity to write a book, I had never in my life set out to write a book, but a literary agent called and said, no, you should write one. And it was just a reminder of, okay, maybe I can do that. And if I'm going to, what's that going to look like? The article didn't give my backstory. So people assumed I wrote the article because I was a therapist who'd mastered all of these things. They didn't necessarily know. Actually, I didn't write it from the top of the mountain. I wrote it from the very bottom of the valley. I was in a place where I needed that content. So I struggled because I thought, do I really want to tell my story? I'm a therapist. We're taught to be private, especially in public settings. You know, you don't want your therapy clients to know what you're struggling with because it kind of changes the dynamic. So I hesitated, but decided ultimately I'm going to go for it. I guess I'll share the backstory because I wouldn't have felt like I was being authentic if I didn't.
What's the old saying? We often write the book that we need ourselves, right?
Correct.
What's the biggest misconception people have about being mentally strong, you think?
People often confuse it with acting tough. They think that
that's where I was going.
Yeah. And even the language that we use. I mean, we say stuff like, well, what doesn't kill you will make you stronger. That's not true, right?
Great advice. Great advice.
As a therapist, I see people who go through tragedy and they're scarred. They are forever changed. It didn't necessarily make them stronger. It created lots of issues in their life. Or people will say things like, make sure you check on your strong friends. To which I would argue, your strong friends are the ones who are asking for help. They're the ones who are talking about their feelings. They're not the ones who are just pretending to be tough. So there's this idea that mental strength is about suppressing your emotions. It's about running a marathon on a broken ankle, that somehow that means you're strong. And a lot of people who talk about mental toughness, they're Navy SEALs. And yes, out on the battlefield, when you have a mission to accomplish, those skills are really important. You're not going to turn to the person next to you and be like, having kind of a bad day today, feeling a little anxious, right? In those moments, you need to be able to stuff it down. But in real life, mental strength and the problems that we go through, the everyday challenges, it's important to be able to acknowledge your feelings, to work through them, to be able to cope with them, to talk about it with other people, to ask for help. And that doesn't make you needy. It doesn't make you weak or anything like that. But I hear so many of those misconceptions. Or somebody will say, I'm really tired of being strong. No, just like with physical strength, you don't get tired of having big biceps. Maybe you get tired of trying to lift things that you can't lift because you aren't strong enough. And I just really want people to know that if you're saying any of those things, or you're thinking, I don't want to be the strong one all the time, you're probably not being strong. You're just acting tough.
Wow. That might be kind of hard to accept.
And I think it is, because as a culture, we've really absorbed that idea that strength is about tolerating a toxic environment. It's about suffering for the sake of suffering. It's about proving to other people that you can do things that you didn't think you could do, to the point where maybe it might damage your life. If I said I'm going to run a marathon and I have a sprained ankle, then I think, nope, I'm going to finish this marathon no matter what. Well, that's about your ego. That's about trying to prove to other people that you can tough it out. Whereas it might take real strength to say, all right, I'm going to sit this one out. Or even though this was my goal, I'm not going to finish it. Sometimes quitting is actually a sign of strength.
I love that. Proud quitter. I just, no, but that's it's really interesting, because when you describe the Navy SEAL, and they're sort of trained to suppress in those moments, but then you come back. No one really has trained them to be strong in the moments where you're being vulnerable at the same time. And you mentioned earlier that it's something that you can develop, right? So it's a muscle. How do you do that?
Yeah, so similar to if you were going to build physical strength, right? You need to go to the gym, you need to work out, but then it's also important to say, what else are you going to give up? So if I were going to go see a physical trainer and they said run on the treadmill and lift weights, that's great. But I also should probably give up the jelly donuts I'm eating on the way to the gym, right? So that's why my first 6 books were really about what not to do. If you give up these unhealthy habits, then you don't have to run on the treadmill so long. And when it comes to mental strength, it's just things like the little things that can affect the way we think, the way we feel, and the way that we behave. So our thoughts, it might be reframing the unhelpful thoughts. It might be about practicing self-compassion rather than self-criticism. It's about testing some of our beliefs. If I think, oh, I'm horrible at everything I do, I don't have to believe that. I can challenge it. And then the emotional piece is about knowing that you have some control over your feelings. If I wake up in a bad mood, I don't have to stay in a bad mood. I could do some things that cheer myself up, but to also recognize that sometimes I need to work through those emotions, not just shift them or change them. If I'm really angry about something, I might need to calm down before I address it, but my anger might also be a clue, this isn't right. I need to speak up. Or if I'm really sad about something, that's how we honor something that we lost. If I'm always pushing it aside, it doesn't go away. It just gets buried and then it eventually comes out. So it's about knowing that difference. When do I work through my emotion? When do I kind of shelve it temporarily? But then how am I going to come back to it and work through it? And then the third piece is really the behavioral piece, because nobody changes their life just by thinking differently. You have to actually take the action, right? And put it into play. Or just because you feel better, you actually then have to do better. So it might be about going for that promotion, even though you're kind of scared, or making the phone call, even though you have high anxiety, and knowing that you can push through those things when you need to.
Yeah, I love this. I just did a book on self-talk, and a lot of what you're talking about here is how do you talk to yourself, and the language you use, right? When you are in a bad mood in the morning and you're saying, I don't feel like doing this. I'm not good enough to do this today, or you're feeling, and I love this. This really becomes habit, like changing some of these things become habits. And but I do want to ask, the new book is really about strength at work, and I think this is a really relevant time to have this discussion because I think work is tougher now for a lot of reasons. We don't need to go into those. We all probably know them. A lot of stress, right? A lot of stress about the future, a lot of stress about the politics and how you get along at work, all those things. Why is that so important to you now? And talk about like your thoughts on that, and how do we do better? How do we feel better about what we're doing?
Well, a lot of the coping strategies that work at home aren't necessarily things you can do in the office. If I'm
Right.
incredibly anxious about something in my personal life, chances are I might cancel, I might put it off, I might decide to do something else, or I get emotional support, right? If I have to go to this event and I am terrified to do it, maybe I bring a friend or I invite my spouse to go to make it a little bit more comfortable. Well, you can't do that at work. If you have a huge presentation and your anxiety has skyrocketed, I can't like bring a friend in with me, or I can't tell my boss, I'm going to actually not do that today.
Yeah.
So that's why it's important to have strategies that work in the workplace, things that you can put into play, but like right in the moment. I think a lot of corporate wellness programs give us things like meditation apps, which are great. I think those are wonderful things. But what about when you're sitting at your desk and it's a Wednesday afternoon and you have to make 3 sales calls? You're really worried about everything in your personal life. You're distracted. You're having a rough day. How do you get your head in the game? And so many people say like, oh, check your feelings at the door. Well, that's not realistic. We carry our emotions into the workplace, and yet we don't talk about it, or we pretend it doesn't exist, or we pretend like our personal problems aren't something that really affect us at work. But how many people are getting phone calls from the school that your kid's in trouble, or you're getting a phone call that your mother just fell? And we don't discuss, how do you keep working? And for me, after my husband passed away, I'd already lost my mom, and then my husband died, and I had to figure out, how do I go back to work as a therapist? I'm supposed to help other people deal with their problems, and my life is literally in shambles. Everything is flipped upside down. And there was no book that told me how to do it. How do I stay present with people when I felt sick and I was so worried about how I was going to pay the bills, or when I was so sad I could hardly function? How do you go into work like that? My story is not unique. We all go through grief. We all go through personal difficulties, and we're expected to still show up because that's often when we need the money and the benefits the most. But even if you aren't going through a personal tragedy, as you said, there's so much stress these days in terms of,
Yeah.
is AI going to take my job? What's the future look like? And people are
Yeah.
struggling. And so we're seeing these things, like for a while, it was the quiet quitting, where people were just like, I'm not going to put in much effort. I'm just going to hang on. And we're seeing people resigning, and then we see people panic because they don't even have the energy right now to apply for a new job. They hate the one they're in, but they're saying, I don't have it in me to even look for a new job.
Right.
So they're feeling miserable and they're feeling stuck. So that's one of the reasons why I wrote the book, so that people had a playbook. Here's the strategies you can use right now at your desk on a Wednesday at noon when you're feeling either down or you're struggling to stay focused or you need a tool to help you perform at your peak this afternoon.
Mm. Hey, Cynthia, you're on mute.
Yep, thank you. Need to hear that. How much does self-awareness like play into this? Because I know that sometimes we just don't even think about what we're going through, right? We shove that to the side at work, and now we've lost track of what's actually driving us crazy. So
yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Self-awareness is huge. And sometimes I'll encourage people to do a play called Name It to Tame It, which is just acknowledge how you feel. And it might be as simple as print out a list of feeling words and you tape it on your bathroom mirror. And hopefully when you're brushing your teeth before you go to work, just look at the list and say, how do I feel right now? And then once you identify that feeling word, whether it's sad or anxious or angry, you start thinking, how might this affect me during my workday? And we know that your emotions do carry over. You can't just shut them off because you've walked into the office door. So let's take sadness, for example. Maybe you're sad about a friendship that ended or a relationship that ended. Research will show that you're a terrible negotiator when you're sad. Like you'll accept a counteroffer that's bad because you're like, oh, I don't really want to make another offer back because what if it doesn't get accepted? My self-esteem can't handle one more blow. So if you ask for a raise on a day when you're really sad, it's the worst day to do it. But if you don't recognize, gee, I'm really sad today, and maybe it's a sales call that you can't get out of. So, all right, I'm feeling kind of sad, but I have this sales call. So then what's my options? Maybe right before you get on that call, you pull out a little happiness trick that boosts your mood just a little so that you'll perform a little bit better. But you do have to be self-aware. All right, how am I feeling today? And how might that affect my work? Or let's take anger or embarrassment. We tend to take huge risks when we feel angry or embarrassed. So you might walk into work and just like roll the dice and say, I want to throw caution to the wind without recognizing why you're doing it. I've seen people that are like, I'm not usually impulsive, but guess what I did last week? And then we'll talk about like, what was your emotional state when you walked in? And they're like, might be like, well, I was kind of embarrassed about this thing that happened the night before. Oh, let's see if we can connect those dots. And even excitement, when people are excited about something, we tend to make terrible decisions. So if I get offered a get rich quick scheme and I'm really excited about it, I might think, yeah, there's no way I could lose. So just being more in tune with how do we feel? How do those emotions potentially affect my decisions throughout the day? And then taking charge. What am I going to do about it? If I have to do this thing and my emotions are not serving me well, how do I take charge of my feelings? And there's so many skills and plays and tools you can do to shift your emotional state right in the moment. And having those at your fingertips is really important because sometimes you need to boost your mood, or sometimes you need to calm yourself down, or you need to be able to get yourself in the right emotional state that the moment calls for.
I know. I want to ask you about that happiness trick in a minute. I know one of the things I do is I keep this journal of, good reviews or good comments about my coaching or something that if I'm in a mood, I know I need like a little pick me up. I know that's what I go to. But I want to ask you what that trick is, but not now. I want to ask you something else real quick. Talk about leaders here, because this book seems for me and I coach leaders and I, it's tough on leaders now because like you said before, we tell people to leave their personal stuff at home. We leave them to, check all that stuff at the door, and that's just not reality. And I think more than ever, leaders need to be aware of that, and they need to be attuned to what's, how people are doing. And how do you take this as a leader and use this material and help your people? Because I think if we double down on our people right now, that's the best thing that we can do as leaders. How can we use this as a leader to help our people, I guess is the question. And that's a big question, but
I think you're right. Investing in the people on your team is one of the best things you can do to retain people over time, to help them work at their best. And for leaders, because the flip side of the coin that I'm hearing from a lot of them these days is, I'm not equipped to deal with this. People are coming in and some of them are spilling their personal lives with me, and I'm not a therapist. So what do I do about this other than tell them, you should be connected with our EAP or something along those lines? And I don't think we want to do that. It's not always appropriate to share with your boss or your manager all your personal problems or the crisis of the day. But we can give the people the tools and skills and strategies that they need. And so just by normalizing the fact that, yes, sometimes we're struggling in the office and that's important to address. But here's the skills and tools that you can have right at your fingertips. So when you're having a bad day, but we have a sales meeting that you need to be present for, how do you boost your mood, right? How do you make sure that you can be present for it? And if we talk more about that and just kind of normalize, yep, this is hard. It's hard to be present at your job when you're stressed out or when you're dealing with uncertainty, whether it's personal or professional, and to acknowledge our feelings more. And so often people just want to be like, nope, emotions don't matter at work, or check your feelings at the door. So if we can just acknowledge, no, we all have emotions. Our emotions affect our decisions. We'll give each other grace. When you fire off that email and I know you were a little heated, I'll give you some grace about it and let's have a conversation perhaps and talk about how to do better next time. I think that goes a long way. It's when people feel like they're ashamed of a mistake that they've made, or when people are struggling with their emotions, but they feel like nobody else understands, they start working on it in isolation. And that's what we don't want.
Yeah.
How do you know when the mentally strong thing to do is to get out of that situation versus get through it?
Oh, that's a good question, because I see a lot of people that are like, I should be able to handle this. And they might be in a really toxic job, but they think if I were stronger, I'd be able to put up with it longer. So I think an important thing is to ask yourself, like, number one, why am I staying? And to get down to that, is it because of my ego? Is it because I would feel like a failure if I left? Or might it just be that maybe it's not as bad as I'm making it out to be? Perhaps my boss is annoying or demanding, but I like the other aspects of my job. And when we get things out of our head and we write it down, it can go a long way. So if you start creating a list of pros and cons of staying versus pros and cons of leaving, what's really going on? Is there a problem to be solved? I think that's another big one. Sometimes we assume that we're stuck, but we don't actually take any action. And on the other hand, sometimes we do the opposite, where we think, I should be able to fix this. And so much of our energy goes to fixing, say, a policy that we have no control over. So ask yourself that, like, is this a problem I can solve, or do I just need to solve how I feel about the problem? And getting clearer on that can help too. But to recognize the toll it's taking on you. If you're in a job and it's taking a toll on your physical health, your mental health, your relationships, get really clear and honest about that. Like, what is this costing me? And even if you had to take another job where, say, you make less money, or maybe the commute's a little more difficult, like, what might that be like for you if it opened up new doors? And zooming out every once in a while to get some perspective or some psychological distance. Like, what would I say to my friend right now if they were struggling with a job like this? Sometimes that helps us to make the decision a little bit more clearly.
Well, unfortunately, we're getting time. I know we've got maybe a couple more questions. It's time for that. But I want to talk about the 50 tools from the Mental Strength Playbook. If you could give us one or two, and including that happiness trick, what's the one or two greatest tools that have the most immediate impact, you think?
So there's 5 happiness hacks. There's a chapter called Happiness Hacks, and there's 5 different ones that you can do to boost your mood in the moment. One of my favorites is to employ a mood booster. So I don't know what you do when you're in a good mood, but you do. So I'll do this with my therapy clients, whether they're battling depression or it's a coaching client who says, I really struggle on Mondays. But we'll write down, like, what are 10 things you would do at work if you were in a good mood? And people might say, I talk to my coworkers, I take a lap around the office, maybe I bring coffee in for everybody. But we come up with that list. Here are the things you do when you're in a good mood. And then you're going to hold on to that list. And when you're in a bad mood, I want you to do something from the good mood list. And you don't feel like doing it. So when you're in a really bad mood, maybe you think, I don't really feel like listening to upbeat music. But that's the exact thing you need to do to shift your emotional state. So it's a really simple strategy. Just come up with the things. And then I would encourage people to do it at home too. When you come home from work and you're in a great mood, what do? And then when you come home from work one day and you're in a really bad mood, you do something off of that list, because most of us do very different things depending on what kind of mood we're in. And that's because our brain wants to stay in the same state. So if you listen to sad music when you're sad, you just reinforce your sadness. But if you put on some happy music, you might feel just a little bit better. It's not a magical cure that's going to help you to go from a 0 to 10 on a happiness scale, but it might bump you up enough that you start to feel just a little bit better. So that's one of the easiest things we could do to boost our mood and feel a little bit happier. So that works well, maybe right before a meeting. You're feeling down, but you go for that lap around the office and you talk to people rather than shut the door like you feel like. And just give yourself a little boost. You walk into the meeting feeling a little bit better, and then you do better. So there's that one. Another big one people often talk about is anxiety, because who doesn't have anxiety? And when it crops up at work, what do? One of my favorites is if you have a huge spike in anxiety, like you're about to give a speech and your anxiety is through the roof, you could sit down and write what we call a reverse worry list. Come up with some things that you're excited about. It might be, I'm excited that I brought my favorite turkey sandwich for lunch today. I'm excited on Friday, I'm going to go watch a movie with my kids. Next month, I'm going to the beach and I have a long weekend. I can't wait for that. Write down everything in your life you have to be excited about. And then you read that list. And then you tell yourself what I'm experiencing right now in my body, that rapid heartbeat, the sweaty palms, my shallow breathing, that's excitement. It's not anxiety. And when you tell yourself that, because our bodies respond exactly the same to excitement as it does to anxiety, it's all about how we interpret it. But when you make that shift and you say, this is excitement, it puts your mind into the opportunity mindset instead of the threat mindset. You'll perform better. You'll probably crush your speech and feel a lot better about your life.
Thank you. Those are very helpful. Cynthia?
Yeah, I love that. I was thinking about it too, like I'm at home, when you work from home and you're like just one door away from like destroying your family's, day because you weren't about it.
Right. And I think it's important for people to work from home to recognize that too, that like, okay, when I'm in a bad mood at home and I isolate myself, I get annoyed with every interruption and I'm really struggling. Like what helps? Sometimes it's like literally go touch grass, right? Go outside for 5 minutes, take a little bit of a breather and calm down or cheer yourself up. But it's usually in those moments we convince ourselves, I don't have time. I have a tight schedule. I have to do all these things. And that's what keeps us stuck. And then we end up being less productive. We feel worse. And then we take it out on our loved ones.
Well, I love this conversation because it's so, this book is something you can just hand off to someone and they can sort of choose their own adventure, if you will, which is nice. And I love that format. I love that you came up with these 50 ways. And you said this is your 7th book, correct?
It is. So all my other books were in the 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do series. But I finally felt like now we need the playbook of what to do. So thrilled to be able to write this book to give people a guide. And as you say, you can kind of flip open to what you're struggling with. You need confidence. There's a confidence catalyst section. You're struggling with your performance. Go onto the performance primers. I tried to give all of these science-backed tools that I use in the therapy office and make them applicable to the workspace so that we can put them into play right now.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you being here and sharing all of these tips with us. And for those who are watching and listening, we're going to put the book in the show notes and all of the details so you can watch the TEDx talk as well. And Amy, it was really great to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.